Howdy, SMITE fans, it's J-Mac. Week number 1 of our group stages kicked off this past weekend. There was nothing but best-of-5 action across the board. And all these matchups to get us ready for our playoffs are going to happen in just a couple of weeks. Well, let's take a walk through the past and see what all happened in this week's SPL Weekly Recap. The start of our weekend and our first set on Friday was the Camelot Kings against the Atlantis Leviathans. The Kings started off hot with a double kill for Netroid, but that double was just about all that they could get. Hardcore and Panatom feasted on the Kings all throughout the mid-game and were able to take game 1. In game 2, the Cthulhu that worked so well for Hardcore did not work out so well for Variety. Panatom and Hardcore yet again able to shut him down and clear the path for the Leviathans to take the second game. The persistence of the Kings in this Ola pick finally pays off in game number 3 as Netroid and Genetics are able to just absolutely control the duo lane. And Variety's Ratatosker goes unmatched not just in damage, not just in global prowess, but in its defensive capabilities. And the Kings pick up game number 3. But now with the Ola off the table, the Leviathan's duo lane can finally begin to thrive. But it's Panatom who pops off for his team. The Kings try for some kind of lantern play over in the duo lane, but end up getting washed out. With that momentum, the Leviathans are able to close out the set 3-1. Well, set number 2 featured the Olympus Bolts taking on the Tartarus Titans. Game 1 was a tight-knit battle up until just shy of 30 minutes, when the Titans come up with a 3-for-1 in a fight around the Fire Giant. From that team fight, they surge up the left lane and they end up taking game number 1. Game 2, again, was a slow pace to start until the Bolts pulled a Fire Giant that gets stolen away by Layers. And with that, the Titans strip out the map of its towers, they take the second Fire Giant, and then they close game number 2. Third game in, the Bolts turn their attention to shutting down the Titans' dual lane. And despite the best efforts of the Titans solo and jungle, the Bolts are able to wrestle control of the game in their favor and take game number 3. But game number 4 is all about Layers. Undying in game 3 and undying in game 4. And even with a Fire Giant steal by the Bolts, it is not enough to stop the Titans. They tear them apart in game 4 and take the set 3-1. We kicked off day number 2 with the Jade Dragons and the Valhalla Valkyries facing off. Game number 1 was a scrappy, back and forth bloodbath between both teams. But once they finally have their first 5v5 standoff, it was the Dragons who walked out unscathed, wiping the Valkyries and sealing their fate in game 1. Second game, it's Sanford Soccer stepping up for the Dragons. He rolls through the Valkyries all early in mid-game, and then teams up with FinoK to close out the late-game team fights and close out game number 2. And in game number 3, it's all about FinoK. The Gilgamesh makes a second appearance on this squad, but this time it's in the solo laner's hands. And FinoK puts on a show, bullying the entirety of the Valkyries team almost single-handedly, and claiming game number 3 and the set. Our second set of the day pits the Solar Scarabs up against the Oni Warriors. First game was a close one, but with just 2 major team fights, the Scarabs overwhelmed the Warriors with just their sheer presence alone. Without needing many kills, the staunch front line of the Scarabs net them game number 1. Game 2, well, I'm going to take a quote from Mifflin here. How did the Scarabs net 7,000 gold from only 2 kills? By the time the Warriors group up to even try and fight, the Scarabs are already way too far ahead, and they blank the Warriors in game number 2. Third game, though, the Warriors flipped some kind of switch. Dardes on the Discordia became an early problem for the Scarabs, and the damage and lockdown of this mid laner proved to be way too much, and the Warriors are able to sneak away game 3. And in game number 4, it was the bully Cucullin game, as Nika and Cuvo Fred focused on shutting down SOT and screamed relentlessly. The deficit of the solo made for easy pickings, and the Warrior can tie the setup 2-2. Then, in our first game 5 of the weekend, the Scarabs, they just mauled the Warriors in game 5. Scream and Stewart dominated both fronts of the map, and the Scarabs earned their first win of the group stage with a 3-2 victory. Well, Sunday rolled around, and our first set to kick off the day was the Jade Dragons and the Atlantis Leviathans. Game number 1 was deceptively close. The Dragons and the Leviathans are able to trade early blows, but it's at a Fire Giant fight that Rongyu seals the objective away and swung the door wide open for his team to take away game number 1. Game number 2 was just all about the Leviathans. The Dragons minimized the deficit early, But a fight around the Fire Giant shows the weaknesses of the Dragon's draft, and Shinto puts them to bed with a quadra kill to close out game number 2. And down but not out, the Dragons fight hard in game number 3, but the objective play of the Leviathans is just too mighty. And the Leviathans come out triumphant with a 3-0 set. Well, our final set of the day and the weekend was the Olympus Bolts facing off against the Solar Scarabs. Game number 1, the Bolts essentially had control of the entirety of it. They stormed up the left side of the map, they take a Phoenix, they win the team fight, and that's all great. Except for the fact they forgot that Scream and SOT had backdoored the entirety of their right lane, stormed up and take the Phoenix, and then kill the Titan to steal away game number 1. Game number 2, the Bolts run back their draft, and this time they're able to keep control of Scream and the rest of the Scarabs. And with Scream locked down and Hope fading away, the Bolts are able to tie up the set 1-1. Well, right off the rip in game 3, Inbound and Stewart completely dominated the duo lane. And Stewart's Reign of Terror coupled with SOT's tankiness and Bobby's CC application toppled the Bolts and snag away game number 3. Game number 4, I'll keep it brief. Barracuda and Jake double killed the Scarabs in duo lane and then farmed the Scarabs for the rest of game 4. And that's pretty much it. Game number 5, though, was a little bit of a slower pace and still the same dominance in the end of the day by the Bolts. The Scarabs fought hard, but after it's all said and done, it's the Bolts who come up victorious with a 3-2 barn burner of a set victory. And there you have it. Week number 1 of the group stage is in the bag. We had some insane sets of 5 games, some upsets. But we still have one more week of group stage to go. That'll start up on Friday at 11 a.m., same time, same place. So make sure that you tune in. But if you ever miss out, don't worry. I'll always have you covered on the SPL Weekly Recap.